I had them all long before I dialed up. How they claiming they on top and I'm a mile up. I had them all long before I dialed up. How they claiming they on top and I'm a mile up. I know the wall's closing in, but don't you dare give up now. Poe believed in me, pull up through some bucks down. Todd told the valet pull the truck round. Push the line up that we drew it, it's just us now. Would you believe me if I told you my granny told me she prayed this? Then booked the surgery just to pull me out of the basement. Right back where I started, nothing to show for a facelift. Got pushed playing Walter White and Davis, never felt so dangerous. The type of power they can't quantify. And name the best from my region, you gotta utter mine. Think of who really putting on, you never come to mind. Rapping like your Spotify, tap you rappers compromise. Yeah, no need to panic, just paint the canvas. If you can feel the static, you're too close, find your balance. Embed the revolution for they prohibition bandwidth. Blood trickle from the leaders he was planning. I had them all line before I dialed up. How they claiming they on top and I'm a mile up. I had them all line before I dialed up. How they claiming they on top and I'm a mile up. Bought at that flight to Amsterdam. When my accountant and minus my family found out too and didn't like it. You're not in the salon with Dale said and I thought he was biased. Then I got a Venmo that's a copy of the finest. Before my foolishness settled in, recorded a whole tape before we got to Berlin. This close to giving up and now never again. Don't overlook the work and come expecting to win. In the end, my word, never put nothing over the squad. Got it right up under their nose and try the facade. Off the cliff with broken wings, I'm aware of the odds. Enough faith for us all, I'm the one for the job. Most days, catching sun rays, baby, look like the front page. Overthinking what they might say, have it your way. Yeah, the biggest threat is something they never seen. Dial it up, patch me into the screen. I had them all line before I dial up. How they claiming they on top and I'm a mile up. I had them all line before I dial up.
Good evening, everyone. Happy Saturday. Happy Father's Day. Happy almost Juneteenth to everyone. This is Jackie Luqman, and you are watching another episode of Luqman Nation, the monthly edition of Blackonomically speaking in Luqman Nation. Thank you so much for joining me on a Saturday as opposed to our regular Friday. Had a little bit of an emergency yesterday that precluded our regularly scheduled programming, but here we are, thankfully, very, very happy that we were able to still do our very important show for this month about talking about economics from a Black perspective, because this is always really, really important information that I am so glad we are able to do on a regular basis, particularly on Black Power Media, the most dangerous platform on social media. And you're watching on Luqman Nation, the most dangerous show on social media. So to get the housekeeping out of the way, if you are watching on Black Power Media, you can support Black Power Media by subscribing if you have not subscribed yet. And you can also support Black Power Media by supporting them on Luqman, Lord have mercy, supporting us on Patreon, patreon.com/Luqman. Oh my God, I've been talking too much. When you talk for a living, it just gets patreon.com/Black Power Media. But yes, you can support Luqman Nation also on Patreon, patreon.com/Luqman Nation, LuqMannation. And if you support Luqman Nation on Patreon, you will get a monthly patrons only stream just for you. You get to ask questions, you suggest topics, whatever you want me to talk about, that's what we'll do. So thank you so much for your support. And I am happy to bring on to the stage once again our friend, Dr. Linwood Tauheed. How you doing, Dr. Tauheed?
I'm doing well. Good to see you, Sister Jacqueline.
It is good to be
you.
seen.
Yes.
Indeed. These are,
Glad you're able to do this today.
yeah, very interesting times are going on. So, of course, Dr. Tauheed, happy Father's Day.
Thank you.
And of course, you are not in DC, so you were not. I'm not sure if these other events were going on around the
Hmm.
country regarding the Moral March that happened here in DC.
Hmm.
Um, the Black Alliance for Peace, the organization I belong to, had a separate action ahead of the march
Hmm.
because we are opposed to the support for the war in Ukraine that has been expressed as a part of the march. And we feel that there is a deep contradiction between in supporting the war in Ukraine, where $54 billion has been transferred to Ukraine in the way of weapons, and a lot of that money has gone to defense contractors in the U.S. But $54 billion allocated from the U.S. government to Ukraine and weapons, support for their government, support to shore up their pensions, but not a dime for the poor. So,
Right. Right.
with the Black Alliance for Peace, this morning, we were out raising those contradictions ahead of the march. And I just to kick it off, I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that, Dr. Tawhid, because war is, I mean, there is a long standing, I mean, decades old Black radical
Yeah.
anti-war, anti-imperialist tradition that the Black Alliance for Peace really was created to
Hmm.
revive and to bring to the forefront. So how do you see us being able to raise this
Hmm.
contradiction of the way this government is spending so much money without
Hmm.
resistance, bipartisan support, with the exception of some of the Republicans, which is very strange. I mean, it's weird that we anti-imperialist Black folks um, have something in common with Republicans, although they're opposing war funding for a completely different reason
Hmm.
than why we are opposing war funding, and that's a whole nother discussion. But how do you see us being able to enter this conversation and turn the seemingly blanket support for
Hmm.
this war in Ukraine and the funding for it to really the bread and butter issues that money can be used and should have been used to
Hmm.
fund issues to make poor people's lives better in this country?
Yeah, well, yeah, as you know, the Black radical tradition has had a long-standing principled stance against war, period, right?
Hmm.
Against the process of using military power or might in general to oppress or to subdue or to extend the will, particularly the national will of countries that are only engaged in expanding their will by force instead of by negotiation or diplomacy. Um, Interestingly enough, I had a occasion this past week to call into a radio program that I mentioned I wanted to call into before because the host on a progressive station had said some things about the Ukrainian situation that I wanted to respond to, and I did. He didn't say exactly the same theme, but he was playing a speech from President Kennedy from the '60s, where President Kennedy was one saying that there were forces in the U.S. that wanted to divide us, internal forces. He was talking about the Southern strategy, coming out of Nixon's campaign and the growing development of white nationalism in the 1960s. And he was saying that's an internal issue, but the real enemy is external. And of course, he was pointing to the Soviet Union.
Mm.
And I called in to tell this progressive, this host on a progressive station that is there's a different perspective, that the African American community in this country has a more imminent and emergent threat, existential threat from internal forces than we have from external forces like Vladimir Putin. we have internal issues that we cannot ignore before we begin to even think about the rightness or wrongness of some external quote enemy to the United States, as many in the U.S. think about that. His original comment some months ago, he said he had visited Ukraine and Ukraine he some time ago, and he had seen Nazis. He had been with met with Nazis who had actually fought with Hitler, and he was saying these neo Nazis, the Azov Battalion and so forth, they're not real Nazis. They're and I wanted at the time to call in and say, well, real Nazis or fake Nazis have no problem with you, but both have problems with me. And,
Hmm.
and so I think the Black community has to have a long-term and principled, continuing principled stance in terms of not only war, but whose side this country is on in terms of war. It wasn't that long ago that quote progressives in this country, or progressive politicians, those in Congress who are members of the Progressive Caucus, were denouncing the Nazis, the neo-Nazis in Ukraine, and even President Obama refused to send weapons to Ukraine because he was afraid that the weapons would get into the hands of neo-Nazis. Now all that's changed. Even
Right.
the progressives are for war and are voting to send money. So-called progressives. I don't know. I used to call myself a liberal. Then I started saying I'm a progressive. I don't know what I am now. Maybe I have to continue to move. I guess my affiliation, because these folks continue to let us down. They have no principles
Yeah,
that they're willing to stand by, and Black folks have to have the principle of survival for Black folks. But we know certainly as part of the Black radical tradition that Black lives matter, because if Black lives don't matter, no one's life matters. We understand that, and so war in this instance, we can talk about how this war was initiated,
hmm
and even Pope Francis said that the European Union and NATO kind of urged this war to happen. And of course, then the U.S. We know that the U.S. Has been involved diplomatically and financially with Nazis, supporting Nazis in Ukraine at least since 2014, if not earlier. And that puts them on the other side of Black folks here and internationally. And so we have to have a different perspective. Our perspective can't be the regular governmental perspective, because that's not something that generally aligns with our interests. Except, as you mentioned, now Republicans for a different reason are aligned, but it's for different reasons. They have different principles that they're aligning on. Their aligning is we're just spending too much money. Period.
hmm
So if we weren't spending too much money in Ukraine, they're not advocating we spend that money here for poor folks or for Black. They're just advocating we don't spend anything, for the poor.
Yeah, it's a very, very interesting time, especially since there are so many internal contradictions, where we are fighting against internal issues that are not being resolved, that
Hmm.
could be resolved with
Yes.
a lot of that $54 billion. And,
Hmm.
and for the past week, I've been saying $56 billion because I think in my mind, I know that by the end of what is this now, June, by July 4th, I bet you that we're going to be that they're going to send more money to Ukraine. So we're going to be very close to $56 billion
Yes.
allocated to Ukraine. And this is just since February of this
Hmm.
year,
Right.
folks. We're not talking about, since last fiscal year. No, we are talking about $54 billion that Congress has allocated to send to Ukraine in some way, shape,
Yeah.
or form
Yeah.
just since February. That
Yeah.
doesn't even include the money that was spent, to create this mess
Mhm.
from 2014
Right.
on. So yeah,
Yeah.
all of that. So the internal contradictions that poor people, in particular, poor Black people, poor Indigenous people, poor Latinx people face in this country, that could be resolved with that kind of money,
Mhm.
um, is one of those issues is Social Security.
Right.
Now, Social Security is supposed to be, the retirement income of the working class,
Mhm.
basically, right? That's
Right.
supposed to be our retirement fund.
Mhm.
But for years, and I would say decades, Dr. Tawheed, politicians, both conservative and liberal, Democrat and Republican alike, have been threatening that Social Security is becoming insolvent.
Mhm.
We're going to run out of money for Social Security, and that's weird to me, since people are still working and people are still paying into, getting Social Security, taxes taken out of their paychecks.
Right.
So I think the first question that I have about Social Security that we need to understand is it true that Social Security is becoming insolvent, or is under threat of becoming insolvent?
Well, if we just want to look at the numbers on an accounting spreadsheet, Social Security is predicted to become, quote, insolvent in 2034. And that was a this recent statement by Treasury Secretary Yellen. Now people don't understand necessarily what insolvent means. So
Mhm.
insolvent doesn't mean that there will be no money in the Social Security fund. It's called the Social Security Trust Fund. And so our payroll taxes go into a fund out of which Social Security payments are made. And right now, there's more money coming into the fund than is being paid out. So the fund is and has been running a surplus for decades. Okay. Now, if you were to actually to look in the account for that fund, you wouldn't find dollars. Of course, you're not going to find dollars anyway. This is a computerized fund, so you'll find the ones and zeros. But what you will find is that other agencies of the US government have borrowed that money, maybe part of it going to Ukraine, and have replaced it with US government bonds, right? And so you find in the trust fund bonds that represent the surplus. And so we are on a system in which money comes in and then money is paid out, and there's a surplus of money, but that money is now moved into other departments for its use. So, and that's important because there's some politicians who are arguing that the Social Security payments are causing the government deficit, right? Causing the government to spend more than it brings in taxation. Well, there are other departments that are spending more than taxation, but in the Social Security Fund, which is a separate fund, there's actually less being spent out than they're coming in. And one of the reasons for that is we have about 3 persons working for every person receiving Social Security. And those 3 persons working, of course, have Social Security taxes coming out of their pay, going into that fund, and then money to support that one person goes out. So there's more than needed. By 2034, then we will be prediction down to 2 workers working for every retiree. And so the idea is that there will be money coming in because people will still be working, but there will be more going out than coming in. And that's what is meant by insolvent. It doesn't mean that there's no money in the fund. It means that there's less money coming in than going out. Excuse me, yes, less money coming in than going out. But it's important that idea 2034 is looked upon as an important date because the things that you have to do, I suppose, if it becomes insolvent, And so there are let me go forward. I've got some notes here. There's a list of about 6 different kinds of things that are proposed as a solution to that, right? Now, the current Social Security tax rate is 6.2%. Employees pay 6.2% of their gross earnings, and then employers match that with 6.2%. So it's 12.4% that goes into from every of every dollar that goes into the fund. Some are arguing that okay, you can stop this insolvency by raising the rate. Some have argued you raise the rate as much as to 8 something percent, or 8.2%. Now, of course, what that does is that increased rate. This is a regressive tax, and so the poor paying 8.2%, paying more, is a burden for them when it's not a burden for the wealthy.
Right.
And we'll talk about that burden on the wealthy as well. But that's one solution. Another is raising the retirement age. Hillary Clinton argued during her campaign that the retirement age, which is now 66 years, the full retirement age, should be raised by a couple of years. So you won't get to retire till a couple more years, and that will slow down the amount of payment. One of the issues with that is, of course, then Black folks are more penalized by that because the life expectancy rate currently for African Americans, men and women, is 72 years, whereas for whites, men and women, it's 78 years.
Oh,
And
wait,
so,
hold on.
and so in that, Blacks would, if you raise the rate to 68 years, then average Social Security recipient would have 4 years of Social Security, Black until they transition.
Mm-hmm.
And in 4 years, they probably won't get out of Social Security as much as they put in. So that would be a bad deal. Whites would still get more than they put in. And so that's the second solution, though. Another solution is to reducing the cost of living allowance because of inflation, recent levels of inflation. Well, the cost of living allowance is an adjustment to the payments to account for inflation. And so in 2022, because inflation has been so high, that the cost of living allowance for Social Security is, I believe, 5.7%. There will be a 5.7% increase starting in 2022 for Social Security, all recipients, as a result of the high inflation. So that's a third, quote, solution. I saw someone said 1 and 2 is not it. Well, for me, none of these are it.
And there you got the follow-up. Neither is option.
Yeah, so-called solutions. Now, another is cutting the benefits. And so there are persons who argue that, if we wait till insolvency, you would actually only have about 75% of what's needed coming in. So you would have to reduce benefits by 25%. Then there's others who say, well, let's not wait till then. Let's reduce benefits now. Of course, that means that, of course, Black folks who are not making it will not make it even more on Social Security. First of all, the average Social Security payment is about $1,600. Now, the average African American male security payment is $1,200 a month.
Oh,
The average African American female woman's payment is $1,067 a month. Yes. The average for all men, the average payment is, you say I haven't done my calculation here. That looks like about $1,600 a month. Yeah, that $1,697 would be right. For women, that payment would be something like $1,100 for all women. And so now there are a significant number, and I don't have the number on the top of my head, but there are a significant number of African Americans and others, but African Americans most prominently, who rely on Social Security for all of their income or a significant part of their income. That is, they have no pension, they have no investments. Social Security is all they get. And so if you're reducing payments from $1,200 a month to what, you're increasing the misery, of course. That's a proposed solution, but it's not a solution.
So we're
Now,
really,
there are two more solutions. There's one
oh my
solution.
God, they have more? Okay.
Yeah. There's one solution that says, look, there is a cap on the amount of income that people earn to which Social Security applies. And that cap is $147,000 right now. That is, if you earn more than $147,000, Social Security payments stop. That 6.2% is not taken out on income higher than $147,000. Now, that's a significant small portion of the population who are making that much a year and more. But the estimate is this: if we were to, let's say, remove that cap and have that 6.2% on all income, then we wouldn't have to, quote, worry about insolvency into 2090s, right? That pushes that problem off for a long, long time. And 2090, a projection of insolvency in 2090 is really no projection, because who knows how many workers or what's going to happen in the next 70 years.
Right.
There's another solution that I want to talk about also, which is privatization.
Mm.
Let's turn Social Security over to Goldman Sachs. To and instead of having a payroll payment into Social Security managed by the U.S. government. Now, the U.S. government Social Security system has about a 3% overhead. That is, 3% of the money that comes in goes to administering the fund. There is no mutual fund or IRA or any other private investment that has a fee of 3%. Fees are much, much higher than that.
Mm-hmm.
And so the fees would make finance rich, but it would reduce the premiums for payouts. And so privatization is another one of those, which is not a solution, but it is the solution that's being hawked right now in the Congress, particularly among Republicans who are arguing that it should be privatized. President Bush II,
Mm-hmm.
attempted to privatize Social Security after the response to 9/11. George Bush says, I have some political capital, I'm going to use
Yeah,
it. He
I
went on
remember
a
that.
speaking tour. He went on a speaking tour around the country promoting privatization of Social Security, and the public says, go home. They send him back to DC. And so he couldn't get it done. But
Uh-huh.
it's being brought up again. And there are Republicans in Congress who are arguing that if they get control, they are going to reduce benefits and or privatize Social Security. But we should talk about these quote solutions. The only thing on here that I would accept is removing the cap. But I want to argue from a different point of view about what Social Security is, and how it, quote, can never become insolvent. One, that the arguments that it can become insolvent are wrong, because the U.S. government can always pay its bills. By the constitutional law, it can always pay its bills because it can always create money. But I want to move the focus away from money, because that sometimes confuses people. I want to move the focus to something else when we get there.
Yeah. So I mean, all of this is just like everything you just said. I knew half of it, but the half I didn't know just really makes me angry, which is why I love talking to you, Dr. Tawhid, because you give us reasons to continually question capitalism,
Yes.
and to continually question why we keep voting for politicians who keep playing these games with our money. And the game that and this is our money.
Right.
This really is our money. And the game they are playing now, folks, is something called neoliberalism. If you are not familiar with neoliberalism I'm going to share the definition of neoliberalism from a source that I actually like, Investopedia, because they do sort of explain things in a really basic, everyman kind of way, even though obviously it's pro investment. And I personally have nothing against investments. I have a 401k. I
Mhm.
have some investments. That I have nothing against that. But To think that investing is some liberatory act that's going to get us out of the mess that capitalism constantly creates, particularly for working and poor people, that's ridiculous thinking. So neoliberalism is a very important concept to understand because according to Investopedia, let me make this bigger so everybody can see it. A little bit bigger. There we go. Neoliberalism is a policy model that encompasses both politics and economics and seeks to transfer the control of economic factors from the public sector to the private sector. Many neoliberalism policies enhance the workings of free market capitalism and attempt to place limits on government spending, government regulation, and public ownership. Neoliberalism is often associated with the leadership of Margaret Thatcher, the former Prime Minister of the UK from 1979 to 1990. And if you know anything about the history of the UK, they hated her. They hated her. They hated her. She has transitioned and they still hate her, the working people in the UK, because the austerity measures that she imposed absolutely ravaged people's lives. More recently, neoliberalism has been associated with policies of austerity and attempts to cut government spending on social programs. And that's part of what we're talking about.
Right.
We're talking about fiscal austerity, deregulation, which the reason the baby food shortage exists is because there is a monopoly on the manufacturing of baby food in this country. 3 companies manufacture 80% of the baby food in this country. And the baby food manufacturing lobby successfully lobbied Congress to allow them to avoid regulations, safety regulations that would have had inspectors going to the manufacturing plants to make sure they were producing baby food in a safe and clean manner. Because Abbott, Abbott Manufacturing, the company that closed down, because they were able to successfully lobby Congress to allow them to avoid those pesky regulations and extra inspections, they reported a savings of $5 billion, which they immediately used to buy back their own stock. And the bacteria that the additional regulations was focused toward catching was the bacteria that ended up contaminating baby formula and causing the deaths of 2 babies in this country, causing the plant to be shut down. A whistleblower has written, spilled all the beans about how Abbott, the company in Sturgis, Michigan, were lying about their safety protocols. So that's why deregulation is dangerous. I think that's the best example, and that's really relevant and recent of why deregulation is dangerous. Neoliberalism also favors free trade and privatization and a reduction in government spending. Okay, so this idea of turning over Social Security to private investment equity firms, what would that do for folks like us?
Well, think about what it would do right now. Now, when George Bush went on his tour to privatize Social Security, there were things that were going on in Wall Street that made it, say, more obvious that privatization wasn't the way to go. Wall Street was having problems, right? And so people who had 401ks were seeing their 401ks decline in value. We have that same situation going on now. So imagine you are a Social Security recipient, and your primary means of income, if you're, let's say, all of your Social Security payment is coming out of some private investment fund like an IRA. When Wall Street collapses, as it's doing now, your payments go down. The value in your fund goes down. And so if you were receiving a $1,200 a month payment, maybe now you only receive a $600 a month payment because that's what your fund is worth. Now, That's free market capitalism. That is letting the market decide on how much you get paid. But it's also called starvation,
Mm.
as opposed to having a defined benefit of $1,200 a month, which needs to be raised, right?
Hmm.
But 1,200 is better than 600. Government control of this pension fund, where there is a defined benefit, will work out in the long run, and many times in the short run, with leading to a much better outcome. It's problematic for people who, let's say, only have 401ks, who would have no Social Security for some reason, or no savings of their own,
Hmm.
to rely on the stock market as the source of their payment, because stock markets go up and down. If they go up, you're fine.
Hmm.
But when they go down, you're in trouble, and you may not. You can if it goes up and you have a little extra money, then maybe you can buy another loaf of bread. But if it goes down and you can't buy one loaf of bread, you die. And so the downside is not symmetrical to the upside. Doing better is not the same as having nothing. And so that's one of the problems of turning these social programs over to private interests, is that private interests, first of all, don't care. They don't have to look out after your welfare.
Hmm.
There is no accountability. You can't vote in the chairman of Citicorp, of Citigroup. We can't vote that person in or out, because our privatized Social Security payments are worse than they were before. We can at least lobby, uh, or vote politicians in and out, and let them know that this is not a good idea. We're not going to support it, and if you support it, we're going to vote someone else in. Now, of course, there are powerful lobbyists from finance that lobby to have Social Security privatized, but they have not been successful, because Social Security is kind of that third rail. People understand that turning Social Security payments over to private interests is not something that's going to secure their future.
Hmm.
Uh,
There's an interesting question here. So we should national. Well, it's not a question actually. So we should nationalize the banks. I'm for that. I'm for nationalizing everything. Everything should be nationalized.
well, short of nationalizing every bank, because I don't know how you actually do that in a country that cannot, for example, exert military power to make sure that bankers do what they're supposed to do.
Mm.
But what we need are national banks. What we need are public banks. And there have been proposals to turn, let's say, the post office, U.S. Post Office, into the public banking system. In many countries, it is the public banking system. And I would believe that if we had a public banking system in which people got to compare your public bank to your private bank, they would choose the public bank, and private banks would have to do better, or they'd go out of business. That's what capitalism is supposed to do. You either do better or go out of business. On sometimes it doesn't work that way, but we certainly need public banking, and we can, that I think is as good a solution in this situation as nationalizing the existing private banks.
Now, Dr. Tahi, I also seem to remember that Barack Obama kind of pushed
Mm,
this idea that was very similar to what Bush was pushing, although he branded it as something different.
yes.
It was I can't remember the name of it right now, but Obama was also pushing this privatization of retirement funds. I mean, was that the same thing that Bush was pushing, or was Obama pushing like a public kind of 401k, which didn't really make sense to me? What was that about?
What President Obama did was create a commission to to kind of come to a conclusion about what should be done about social programs. The outcome of the commission was a foregone conclusion, but he was allowed to, in a sense, hide behind that by saying that, you know, he's not making the decision himself, he's turned it over. The persons he turned over this commission to, and I forget the name of the commission, but was a Democrat named Erskine Bowles, who was a retired senator, and a Republican, Alan Simpson, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was Alan Simpson who was the most vocal in arguing that we needed to privatize Social Security as a result of that. Now, the current system of funding social programs, which we call pay-go, right, came out of that commission. And what pay-go means is this: you're only supposed to spend. The government has to recognize that it might need to have a deficit, might need to spend more money on some thing, but then it has to spend less somewhere else. So, for example, if it needs to spend more money in one social program, it has to take money from another social program so that the total amount balances out, right? And so you'll see that work itself out, for example, in the Build Back Better plan debates that came last year that failed, is that there were arguments made, not by Bernie Sanders, whose committee put up the bill, but by conservative Democrats and Republicans, but more conservative Democrats, because Republicans were kind of out of it completely.
Mm-hmm.
Is that, yeah, we want to put in a let's say a credit for child care. That's going to cost money. So we need to take that money that is going to cost from another social program so that we don't unbalance the budget. So what comes out of this commission was the idea, and it said in the Investopedia article, about austerity.
Mm-hmm.
Governments have to watch their spending, can't spend too much, don't want to spend a deficit. So, you know, you might spend more in one place there, but you spend less in another place. Now, what this has never applied to, and what came out of the commission and into law, was that this austerity or this pay-go program does not apply to military spending.
Well, so Nwadi,
so more in the military,
from the military because they're not going to do it.
Yeah, you spend more somewhere else. You can't take it from the military, right? It's not part of that system, so you can't use austerity in the military. Which kind of means you can only use austerity among social programs. So,
God,
the poor have to decide on whether or not they're going to eat or drive cars. So
doesn't that, and there's another question here that Leah has for you that I want to get to. So really, Dr. Tauheed, doesn't the setup of this pay-go program only being focused on social programs,
yes,
doesn't that really like pit the poor against each other?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And in fact, one of the things I was going to mention about President Obama, I was disgusted, not surprised, but he started talking about Social Security as an entitlement program. He started to use that word. Now that term has been used by Republicans all the way back to the beginning of Social Security. It's an entitlement. And by entitlement, they mean welfare program.
Right.
But of course, we don't pay. What Social Security is an insurance program, right? It is titled the Old Age and Survivors Disability Insurance Program. We pay our premiums. Our 6.2% is our premium into the program, and when we reach the age when the insurance program becomes mature, we begin to get our benefits out of that program. It's not a welfare program. We pay into that program. But when President Obama began to use the term entitlement, it was very obvious that he had bought into the neoliberal scheme, and putting the commission in place was just a way for him to hide behind them to get what he wanted. But he didn't get privatization of Social Security done either. He was talking about, it was called the grand bargain, if you remember.
That, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So here's a question from Leah. Can you speak to unregulated capitalism being the problem and that more regulations will fix the problems in capitalism? What are the problems with that thinking? That's a great question.
Yeah. Well, I think of capitalism in two different ways, right? There is the capitalism that produces goods and services. Okay. And that's a capitalism that, for example, Karl Marx talked about. And let me just let you know, I'm not a Marxian, but I am, and I'm an institutionalist. But institutionalism is taking what Marx said and what Smith said and what others saying and asking what's the truth in it, not arguing ideologically that because it's Marx we can throw it all away. Okay, so what Marx argued was that industrial capitalism was a stage between feudalism and communism.
Right.
He argued that it was a good thing to move through capitalism to communism. And the reason was it was a good thing was at least two reasons. One, capitalism comes along and it cuts off all of the aristocratic social relationships of feudalism. No more lords and ladies and so forth. They all disappear. And also capitalism is because it incentivizes production and it invests back into production, increases a country's and economy's production. So that once you get to a certain level of production, you can feed, clothe, and shelter the entire population. We are well past that, being able to feed, clothe, and shelter the entire population of the US, the entire population of the West, in fact, the entire population of the world. We can feed, clothe, and shelter them because industrial capitalism has been productive enough and has created techniques of production enabling that outcome. The other side of the capitalism, and we are much more into that, is what we call financial capitalism. And financial capitalism is not so much, it's not about production, but it's about who gets rewarded from production. Production creates revenue. Who gets that revenue? Right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so, Marx argued that all of that revenue from production, all of the income should go to workers. Okay. What capitalism, financial capitalism argues essentially as much as it can is that all of the outcome from production should go to the capitalist.
The exact other end of the spectrum.
Exactly. But of course, that's not possible because if it all goes to capitalism, workers starve.
Mm-hmm.
So what the capitalists kind of do is make an accommodation that we'll let some of you starve enough. We'll let some of you live enough to produce what we need in order to have that income. In economic theory, classical, from Smith to Marx, that's called economic rent. And what economic rent means is unearned income.
Mm-hmm.
But the capitalist doesn't do a day's worth of useful work, but they get the revenue from the useful work of labor. So now, looking at capitalism in those two contexts, there's the productive side of producing products, goods, and services, and there's what's called the distribution side of who gets the income or the benefit of that. Regulation can help the production side because, like with the baby formula factory, you make sure that the products that are being produced are safe, not contaminated, not made with products that are going to cause a threat to life.
Mm-hmm.
On the distribution side, this quote republic is not prepared to regulate that because that means socialism.
That's my favorite word.
So I don't see you being able to regulate into socialism.
Mm.
Now we can regulate production so that it's better, but socialism is not a uprising, if you will, by the people to bring that unearned income back to the people, right? And I don't see that as a regular. If you regulate the distribution out of capitalism back to the people, you no longer have capitalism. So you don't have a regulated capitalism. What you do have is a regulated production process.
Mm,
But you have to have that in socialism as well. You have to be able to produce food, clothing, and shelter.
right, right.
And look, the systems that are ongoing and developing in China and Russia are hybrid systems. They are capitalist systems of production with socialist systems of distribution,
Hmm.
right? And to the extent that they're able to produce food, clothing, and shelter for their citizens, there's no reason for their citizens to want to change that distribution. But they still have to have regulation. You still can't let production of baby formula in Russia do whatever it wants to do, because it'll produce a contaminated product. So you still have to regulate production.
Hmm.
But the regulation of distribution turns capitalism into something that's not capitalism.
Yeah, and just for a note, when China had an issue with a baby formula manufacturer that produced contaminated baby formula,
Hmm?
not only did they imprison some of the people, they executed I think the CEO of the company. I mean, look, they're and as far as Chinese capitalism is concerned, the reason you see so many Chinese multi-billionaires not living in China is because they are trying very hard to escape the state's control of their end of the relationship, of that
Hmm.
hybrid relationship,
Right.
because every once in a while the Communist Party in China says to these corporations, it's great that you made all this money, now we're taking some and redistributing it to the
Right.
people for people's needs. And some of these CEOs don't like that, so they will move to New York or they'll move to London, and they will try to move some of the legal
Yeah.
aspects of their companies in those countries to avoid the Chinese government redistributing their profits to the people.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's how and I saw someone in the comment, Nwadi, talk about call the hybrid systems in Russia and China like capitalism in a cage. Um, I mean, maybe, but I mean, I think when you have like real world examples of
Yeah.
how the Communist Party in China, and I'm sure I can't, like when the sanctions hit from the United States in Russia, and there were McDonald's in Russia, and then all of McDonald's decided we don't want to be in Russia anymore because
Mhm.
we hate Russia because the U.S. government told us to,
Right.
and then the Russian government just said, okay, fine, we will take these facilities
Right.
and continue to produce the exact same thing
Right.
that the corporation McDonald's was producing. And now it's just Russian. Now it's just Uncle Vanya's. You know?
Yes, exactly. And because look, they have all the ingredients.
Hmm.
They have all of the human capital, the knowledge, and they have the equipment. So if McDonald's was expecting them to go without Big Macs, well, okay, well, they weren't about to do that.
Not at all.
And so that makes the current Russia different than the Soviet Union.
How so?
Well, because the Soviet Union, would not have known how to make Western products.
Wow.
Well, they were, the Soviet Union as a communist country
Hmm.
skipped over the capitalist portion progression that they would have needed to have in order to know how to make a Big Mac. In the last 30 years, the Russians have learned how to do that. They've learned how to be capitalists. So they learned capitalist production, the system of mass production, the
Hmm.
system of specialization, these other kinds of things, and how to do that very well. But they have not adopted the capitalist distribution system.
Mm.
And because they have not done that, they've been able to do much, much more for their people without having income escape the country, right?
Wow.
And those Russians and Chinese, the West calls them oligarchs.
Hmm.
Those same people in the West are called businessmen. They're just the same people.
Yeah, they're the Jamie Dimons. Whatever
Why isn't Elon Musk an oligarch? Why isn't he?
Oh my God, just ridiculous. Okay, so the other end of the privatization of social services spectrum, I think, is geared toward younger people,
Yeah, right.
where we are looking at what is the current student loan debt obligation in this country. It's over $1 trillion. It's one
So,
point
yeah,
seven
1.7 trillion.
trillion dollars or something
Mhm.
like that. The total amount of student loan debt. I mean, um, the United States government spent that much money just on the Department of Defense in the past 10 years.
Yes.
A lot more than that, actually.
Almost that much on Iraq and Afghanistan.
Ooh. So when we realize that the government absolutely has the money
Hmm.
to cancel student loan debt,
Hmm.
and no one, no, things will not collapse, colleges will not close, universities will not cease to exist,
Hmm.
why is that not happening, Dr. Tawhid?
Again, there is this idea that the U.S. government doesn't have enough money, that it will run out of money. And so, if the federally guaranteed student loans provide income to the government. There's interest payments that go to service those government loans. It's not much. I don't know exactly what the figure is, but it's not 1.2 trillion, 7 trillion a year. It's something else. So the U.S. government would lose a couple of $100 million a year in interest. Well, a couple of $100 million is 54 billion to Ukraine instantaneously.
Hmm.
It would be nothing in terms of the federal budget. It would be
That's
a
SOFA change
whole
money.
lot for those persons who have loans that is preventing them from buying houses. Many of our youngers are foreclosing on marriage because they don't want to marry and then put that debt on their partner.
Hmm.
They don't have credit as a result of that, so they can't participate in buying cars and so forth and so on. Just the economic increase that would be unleashed by forgiving those loans, where people now, instead of buying loans, we can buy, paying loans, we can buy a house.
Right.
There's a tremendous upside economically to forgiving those debts. But understand, forgiving those debts is just half of the thing that needs to be done. The other part is that those debts will come back if college tuition is what it is, right? We
Right.
need to move to a free college system. Uh, uh, Industrialized countries around the world, the largest economies, have free college. If I were advising my children right now, if they were going into college, I might advise them to go to Germany to go to college.
Mm.
You can go to Germany, you can get subsidy, you get for housing, you get free college tuition all the way through PhD. And then there are other countries in Europe that have the same or very similar arrangements. Not that I think Germany, it would be a good place for them necessarily, but they wouldn't have student debt that they acquired.
But
But
Dr. Tawhid, how do professors get paid? How can we pay quality professors if we don't have $100,000 a year tuition?
well, let me do this, because I had wanted to go through kind of a continuation of our Social Security privatization discussion.
Hmm. Yes.
But it connects to the question you just asked about having enough money to pay professors. And with the Social Security privatization thing, Social Security in general, because one of the things that's being done with young people is that they're being threatened into, we have to do something about Social Security, but in other words, or you won't have any Social Security payments when you retire. Okay,
Mhm.
so I wanted to address that, but I wanted to take the focus off of money
Mhm.
and put the focus on something else that we call resources.
Mhm.
Okay, and here's a statement that is kind of, I think we should give some thought to. I don't know who said this, but the statement is, I would rather have bread in a time of no money than money in a time of no bread.
Mm. Wow.
Right? I'd rather have bread in a time of no money than money in a time of no bread. Having money is only good if you have the resources to produce the things that you need to survive. Money itself is not productive.
Wow.
You can't take $100 and lock it in a safe and then come back a year from now and have $110. You know,
You sure?
no, I'm pretty sure. I haven't tried that experiment, but I'm pretty sure that money will not produce more money. What produces money is the process of production.
Mm.
And then we get to the end where you have a product that you sell for more than it costs you to produce it. That produces extra income that we call profit. But let's focus on resources. And in this scenario, we use Janet Yellen's, let's say, scenario about Social Security becoming insolvent in 2034. Okay, so let's ask ourselves this question: on December 31st, 2033, end of the year 33, what
Mhm.
is the economy doing? Well, the economy is working, people are working, and those two workers are able to produce enough food, clothing, and shelter, not just for retirees, but for their children and for other people who are not working, like college students. Those two workers are productive. They have the resources, the land, the labor, and the capital to produce enough for the economy to get going.
Mhm.
Okay, and just some statistics here. By 2034, there will be about 75 million retirees.
Mhm.
Okay, Social Security payments are predicted to be um, um, about 6% of gross domestic product. Gross domestic product is estimated to be about $35 trillion in 2034.
Mhm.
So Social Security payments will be about a little over $2 trillion, right?
Right. Okay.
And so the day before 2034, right, the economy is working, it's producing
Mhm.
that $35 trillion
Oh,
worth
I
of
see where
goods
you're
and
going.
services. Now on January 1st, 2034, you look in the Social Security fund and you say, we don't have any money. We can't make our payments. So what happens? No checks go out.
Mm.
What happens to the economy? Well, that's about 6% of the economy
Mm.
that collapses. That's depression. Okay. And so if you don't make those Social Security payments, even though you don't have the money in the fund, the
Mhm.
economy collapses.
Oh, wow.
Now, here's a scenario I want you to think about this because it's outside. Let's say on January 1st, 2034, a hacker hacks into the Social Security Trust Fund account and puts enough money in that account to make payments for that month. I'm not suggesting that someone do that, but here's a hypothetical scenario.
Mhm.
The government looks into the money into the fund and says, "Oh, I thought we were out of money, but we have enough money to make our payments." They make their Social Security payments. What happens to the economy? The answer
Nothing.
is nothing.
Fine. It's
Nobody even notices.
nobody notices. Nothing
Now,
happens.
now you can do that every month forever. The economy doesn't change because the economy is not how much money The economy, as someone says, is the productive capacity of the people.
Mm.
Now, this is not a new revelation. This revelation goes back to Adam Smith. The wealth of nations, what wealth of nations, what Adam Smith was arguing was against a system called mercantilism. Mercantilism was a system, the philosophy was that the wealth of a nation depended on the amount of gold or money in the royal treasury. This was the dominant economic system in Europe. It caused a number of consequences in Europe. For example, from about 1350 to 1450, it caused the 100 Years' Wars in Europe because there's only so much gold, and if I get more of it, you get less of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so countries were fighting each other to see who was going to control the flow of gold, right?
Wow.
Then it also unleashed imperialism and colonialism on the world.
Oh,
Because
wow.
out of that 100 years of Europeans fighting each other, they perfected and improved their weaponry, their weapons of war, so that when they broke out of Europe to other parts of the world, they had the weapons to subdue other people. It
Wow.
wasn't because they were smarter, it's just because they had 100 years of fighting each other that they had better weapons. But then they said, well, we don't have to fight each other for gold. We'll go down to South America and we'll take
Just
all their
steal
gold.
theirs.
We just steal their gold. We go, and so they started this process of bringing gold into Europe on the idea that the wealth of nations was about how much gold. So mercantilism leads to colonialism and enslavement. Now the Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith, was published in 1776, and that date is not coincidental.
Oh,
What Adam Smith is trying to argue is that the wealth of nations doesn't depend on the amount of gold in the treasury, and if you continue with that philosophy, Europe will burst into war against Europeans again,
mm-hmm.
right? You avoid that by arguing that the wealth of nations depends on how productive people are, and the system of organization that we call capitalism on the productive side I was talking about, specialization and different kinds of reinvestment back in the capital, is what will increase the productivity of the country. So now this is not to valorize Adam Smith, but Adam Smith was someone who was trying to keep England on top.
Right, right.
And his analysis of what made England powerful was not the money, it was the production.
Wow.
This is, of course, also what we call that a labor theory of value, was also what Karl Marx agreed with Adam Smith on. That the wealth of nations, if you put it in Marxian terms, the wealth of nations depends on production, but those who produce should be the recipients of that wealth, not
Right.
those who stand on the side and finance it.
So Nwadi has a good question about Adam Smith's argument about the wealth of nations being the ability of the people to produce. Isn't that an argument to continue slavery?
Um, it would be an argument to exploit, yes, those who are enslaved outside of Europe, right? Because Smith's argument was, what his desire was, Britain was on top, but Europe would be peaceful. Yeah, I think that argument goes into an argument of how that would lead to a continuation of slavery. But I would resist the idea that production necessarily leads to slavery. Right? Those two things are the idea that the wealth of nations, that people are better off if they can produce more, is universal.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that you have to enslave others to get them to produce for you, that's a moral failing.
Right, right. And
Right?
and then when you are talking about ensuring that the people who are actually implementing the production, who are
Right.
doing the production, share in the fruit of that production, then that resolves the issue of
Right.
the slavery issue,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
if people
right.
are slaves, you're not going to give them a part of production.
Yeah, it's important for me to separate the industrial side of capitalism
Hmm.
from the distributional side of capitalism. The industrial side of capitalism is about the laws of nature. If you want to produce an automobile, you have to produce it in a certain way. You have to use certain materials. You have to know how to produce it. Now, materials change. We go from gas powered engines to electric, but still there are laws of nature and ways of doing that. How you distribute the revenue from the reduction of automobiles is a political thing. It's not an economic thing, right? That's the
Mm.
political economy there. The economic, we produce things in a certain way. The political is who gets the benefit of that production, and that's a matter of power. And Adam Smith in The Wealth of Nations said that money is power. He understood. He was Adam Smith wasn't trying to argue for or against slavery. He was trying to keep Britain on top and to express to the British Empire what it needed to do in order to continue to be the top economy, which was to become more productive, not to worry so much about the money.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
Yeah.
So, a few questions. So, you said earlier that, there's this pay-go system, but it only applies to social programs
Right.
in the United States. But then the same politicians, in order to pay for things that they want, will
Hmm.
go into the Social Security Trust and take that money and then put a bond there.
Yeah.
So there are no regulations that keep politicians from literally robbing us to pay their Paul.
Well, it's not really a robbery. I mean, they take $1 million out of the trust fund, they put $1 million bond in. Now, that's a government bond. Now,
Hmm.
now back to this discussion about money. Where does that government bond come from? It comes from
Hmm.
thin air, right?
Ah,
Someone takes a piece of paper, says this paper is worth $1 million. Here's the Secretary of the Treasury signature. They take that over to the Federal Reserve Bank. The Federal Reserve takes that, creates $1 million that flows into actually, I'm sorry, this one doesn't go to the Federal Reserve. That's another story. This goes into the trust fund, who takes it
okay.
and says this piece of paper is worth $1 million. Well, why not $1 billion? Why not
Right.
$10,000? Why
Hmm.
not, if you can create this bond to go into the trust fund and take money out of that, why can't you take a bond to finance the original social
Whatever it
program?
was, right.
See, understand, a government like the US, not all governments, but a government like the US that can create its money can pay for anything that it can produce. So that's why the focus is to be on resources. We will not run out of the ability to feed, clothe, and shelter people in 2034 if we have it in 2033. Now, we may not have it in 2033, but that's
Right.
another
That's a
issue.
different story.
If
Yeah.
we have it in 2033 and 2034, we'll still have it. So there's no reason for retirees not to have the money to buy those things one day that they could buy the day before,
Mm.
except that someone says, well, we don't have enough money in the Treasury. U.S. Treasury can always create a bond or new money
Wow.
to pay for whatever it pays for. Um, the issue is bread in times of no money. We'd rather have that than
Hmm.
money in times of no bread, because if we have the bread, the money we can always make up. All money is an IOU anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And
Hmm.
if you write an IOU to someone for $100, you want to buy something from them. If they have it, you can buy it. They can take your IOU. If they don't
Right.
have it, then your IOU doesn't mean anything anyway.
Mm-hmm. So
It's
do
like,
you?
there's another thing. People think about gold,
Uh-huh.
like investing in gold when the U.S. dollar falls, collapses.
Mm-hmm.
How many loaves of bread are you going to buy for a block of gold
A
that you
block
have?
of gold. And how are you going to carry that block of gold around? Do you? I think people have never actually seen like a gold bar.
Well, yeah,
And have never tried to pick one up.
yeah,
It's not like something you carry around in your purse and just,
yeah.
sling it on the counter here. And dear God, if we are buying a loaf of bread with a bar of gold, you'd be better off growing your own wheat because that's just so. Here's
Yeah.
a question from Eugene Mason: fractional reserve. I'm not sure what that refers to.
Well, I know what the term means. I'm not sure about what the question is. What a fact the U.S. Monetary system is what is called a fractional reserve system. So, for example, you have a bank that has $1 million in deposits. The depositors, that'd be a small bank, but say $1 million in deposits. What law requires is that that bank keep a certain amount of that million on hand, just in case key people want to come in and take their money out. So let's say those depositors came in and bought $1 million in greenbacks, in dollars.
Mm-hmm.
They might want to come back and get dollars out. So that $1 million could be turned into some other asset like a loan. People come in to borrow 100,000 here, 10 times that million is gone. And if somebody comes in who had a deposit, let's say they have 1,000 in deposit, they want $100 back. They don't. The bank doesn't have $100 to give them.
Mm-hmm.
So what the fractional reserve system requires is that banks hold back a certain percentage of their deposits as a fraction of what is called the reserve. The reserve is the money outside of that fraction. So, for example, if the fractional, if the reserve requirement is 10%, they have to hold 100,000 in cash in the bank. The other 900,000 is called the reserve. So the fractional reserve means a fraction of the reserve has to remain at the bank. So that depositors, if they come in, they can get their money. Because what happens is when depositors come in and they want their $100 and the bank says, I'm sorry, we don't have $100, they get upset. And they tell people, this bank doesn't have your money. Mm-hmm. And people have a run on the bank to try to get their money out, and it's not there. And that causes trouble in the banking system. Oh. So I don't know what the question was, but that's what a fractional reserve system is.
Yeah, that's Eugene said that's exactly what he meant. That's what he was looking for. So okay. That's fantastic. So Dr. Tauheed, what do we do? What do we regular folks, we regular Black folks, we regular Latinx, we regular Indigenous folks who are, I'm 55 and right. Yes, I have a 401k. I actually have two from my last job. And, I have a few investments, nothing, nothing fancy. I will not be rich when I retire. But I have a little bit of a cushion to supplement Social Security income. Mm-hmm. But I am going to have my Social Security income.
Right.
And I don't want to wait until I'm 70.
Right.
Because honestly, it sounds to me, I am a pessimist when it comes to this government, or maybe I'm a realist. But honestly, it really just sounds like these people are expecting most of us to die before we collect on Social Security, because you can't tell me that they don't know the average life expectancy. Right. And all of these different policies don't feed into each other. Like, there's a reason they don't want to support Medicare for all. They don't want us getting free health care. They don't want us to become healthier so we can live longer, so we can collect our Social Security. They don't want us to get free education. They don't want to fund free education so that we can become more educated and live longer, because those are the things: healthcare, education, decent housing. They don't want to give us affordable housing, because then that means we'll live longer. All of those things are markers of people in societies who live longer. Quality healthcare, quality education, quality housing.
And all of those things happen in countries that either have higher tax rates And so that tax is distributed to the welfare of the people, or they have products that they can sell, like a Venezuela. They have a product that they can sell, the revenue of which they can use to improve the welfare of their people. I was talking to someone about the price of gasoline, and I looked up the price of gasoline in Venezuela. Just I wanted to know. Venezuelan gasoline is 8 cents a gallon, and one reason it's 8 cents a gallon is because they pump oil, they produce gasoline, but they can't sell it.
Right.
Because they're sanctioned. So now,
right. But now the Biden government has had to go hat in hand to the actual president, whether they call him that or not in public. President Nicolas Maduro had to go hat in hand and beg them for gasoline. But you just made you just reminded me of something else. Remember when Barack Obama bragged about the United States being the world's leading exporter of oil? That was me. I did that on my watch. So if the United States is producing all of this oil and gas, why is gas so much in this country?
Well, the U.S. is a net exporter of oil. It produces more oil than it needs. But part of the oil that's being produced is now being shipped to Europe. The deal with Maduro was to ship or to pump oil to ship that to Italy and Spain, right? But when you're shipping part of the U.S. oil to Europe because it's sanctioning Russian oil, then the supply of oil goes down here, and the price of oil goes up. But understand, the price of oil in the U.S. has gone up more than supply and demand would dictate. Oil companies are having what are called windfall profits. Now, what a windfall, the term windfall means, fruit, the wind blows and the fruit falls off the tree to the ground. You pick it up, you don't have to do anything to get that. It just falls in your lap. Well, with the increasing price of oil to U.S. refineries, oil companies are able to acquire a profit that's well beyond the profit they would have had before. And the way it works is this: just a little math. Let's say the price of a gallon of oil is $1 per gallon. The price of refining that oil into gasoline is $1 per gallon. And let's say this company wants to make a 50% profit on that cost. So that's $2 of cost, 50% is another $1. So that's 50% of cost, 50% of service and refinery, and a dollar for profit. That's a $3 per gallon gasoline, right? If the price of oil goes up to $2, the price to refine it into gasoline goes up to $2 because labor costs and raw material costs go up. A 50% margin gives you now $2 in profit. Now, what did the oil company do to increase their profit per gallon from $1 to $2? Did they make better gasoline?
No, they didn't.
Did they make more gas? They didn't do anything. It just fell off the tree into their hands because the prices of things is going up.
Oh my gosh.
And there are persons in the Congress who are saying that we need to tax that windfall profit away. That dollar should go back to the people. And so part of the price of the increase in the price of gasoline is what we call price gouging. They do it because they can, and they hide behind supply and demand and inflation. But it's causing them to have windfall profits more, and it's not just oil and gas. It's lots of manufacturers of goods who are increasing their profits well beyond normal profits because they're hiding behind inflation.
So okay, back to the question I was asking before we got sidetracked by oil, gas, and Venezuela.
It's all connected.
Yeah. By the way, I have a visa for Venezuela that expires next year. So if anybody wants to make a gas run, just let me know.
It might be cheaper to do that.
So what do we do? What do we do to keep politicians from privatizing Social
Yeah.
Security and eventually all of student loans?
Okay. So I think there are a couple of things we need to do. First of all, we need to understand that it is not just the Republicans who want to privatize Social Security. There are certainly conservative Democrats who want to do that. Now, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren have hearings on to not to increase Social Security benefits, to maintain Social Security benefits as a governmental function, to increase Social Security benefits, and to remove that cap, right?
Mm-hmm,
Remove the cap.
hmm.
So, first of all, we shouldn't believe the hype that Social Security is going to become insolvent because we know that we're not going to let the economy fall by 6% overnight because we don't make Social Security payments. We shouldn't be driven by fear, and particularly for young people, you shouldn't be driven by the idea that your Social Security won't be there when you retire, because this government, if we have the resources to feed, clothe, and shelter you, then we can create the money to provide that income for you. But in the near term, what we need to do is to push back on any idea of privatization, to make it known to Democrats. Now, of course, if the Republicans get control of the House and the Senate and the presidency, or maybe even not the presidency, who knows? If they get control of the House and the Senate, they won't worry about filibuster and all that. If,
Hmm.
if if they want to privatize Social Security, they will do so. So we have to push back against Republicans too. Anyone who wants to privatize Social Security, we have to push back on that. That might take something as drastic as a general strike. It may take some real political action. But we can't let them convince us that we've got to do something drastic about Social Security. Otherwise, Social Security is going to fail. We have to throw that out. Social Security, if the country is still operating, Social Security will still be operating. If we don't have an economy in 2034, well, then that's something
Yeah,
different.
that's a different. Yeah, if climate change destroys everything, then that's a different story.
Right, right.
But
So
but
we
you see,
can't believe the hype. We can't go for the hype that we have to do something. We can, in fact, and the thing to do near term is to remove the cap. Just
mm,
remove the cap, and we will have more than enough. Put this problem all the way out to 2090. Hopefully, by 2090, there will be enough. Well, either the country will be here, or it'll be a very different country in terms of its justice to people and ability to provide welfare. Because I don't think we can get to 2090 without having a serious turn in capitalist exploitation. I don't think we have, that's way through climate change, and we can't get there with what we have now.
yeah, I'm not even seeing us getting to 2030 without without a serious change in this system. And like we always say, folks, none of this is going to change. We're
Hmm.
not going to change this by voting. As important as voting is for some things, we're not going to change this system by voting. We're only going to get the system we want through revolution. That's it. That's it. That's all. That's it. There
Well,
there are no shortcuts.
well, business rules in America, and when you make things bad for business, they want to change things. So
And
you,
hit
you
them
can't
in them pockets.
yeah. Well, I guess that's why I became an economist. Follow the money. And so if you make it difficult for capitalists to make a living, well, then well, yeah, make a living, not earn a living. When you
Mhm.
make it difficult for them to make a living, then they might change things.
You heard the man. See, I didn't tell you this time. You heard the man. Dr. Tawheed, thank you so much. This conversation was so important, as every single conversation we have had is, because we talk so much about challenging capitalism and we need socialism, but we very often don't understand why, the details and the particulars of why. And that's why we do this show every month, once a month, on the third Friday or Saturday, depending on what my body decides it wants to do. But as long as I am here once a month, the third week of the month, we will be talking Blackonomically speaking with Dr. Linwood Tawheed. Thank you once again and always for a fantastic show.
Thank you so much for being for my being here, allowing me to be here.
All right, y'all. We will see you next week on Power Lunch with Jackie Lukman, probably Monday, Tuesday, and perhaps Wednesday. But I'm going to be watching more of the hearings to see what else they reveal. They're surprisingly interesting. They've been surprisingly interesting. There is a patrons only show for patrons on my Patreon. That you can check that out. And of course, check us out Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Black Power Media's Remix Morning Show. Appreciate y'all so much. As always, be good to each other and be good to yourselves. A luta continua. The struggle continues. Victoria acerta, but victory is certain. Peace. And they are out here throwing up the peace sign like they won something. Yep. I don't understand what they think they want.
I need to revise. I did see white people this happy. I gave the example of America and the Allies' defeat over Nazi Germany. But I haven't seen this many white people happy. There was a couple periods in history. One was when Nutella was introduced. And I mean, I haven't seen that many white people happy since Nutella was introduced and marketed and stuff. Because white people love Nutella.
They booked the surgery just to pull me out of the basement. Right back where I started, nothing to show for a facelift. Got pushed playing Walter White and Davis, never felt so dangerous. The type of power they can't quantify. And name the best from my region, you gotta utter mine. Think of who really putting on, you never come to mind. Rapping like your Spotify, tap you rappers compromise. Yeah, no need to panic, just paint the canvas. If you can feel the static, you're too close, find your balance. Embed the revolution for their prohibition bandwidth. Blood trickle from the leaders he was planning. I had them all online before I dial up. How they claiming they on top when I'm a mile up. I had them all online before I dial up. How they claiming they on top when I'm a mile up. Bought that flight to Amsterdam. When my accountant of minus, my family found out too and didn't like it. You're not in the salon with Dale said and I thought he was biased. Then I got a Venmo that said copy the finest. Before my foolishness settled in, recorded a whole tape before we got to Berlin. This close to giving up and now never again. Don't overlook the work and come expecting to win. In the end, my word, never put nothing over the squad. Got it right up under their nose, gentrified the facade. Off the cliff with broken wings, I'm aware of the odds. Enough faith for us all, I'm the one for the job. Most days, catching sun rays, baby, look like the front page. Overthinking what they might say, have it your way. Yeah, the biggest threat is something they never seen. Dial it up, patch me into the screen. I had them all online before I dial up. How they claiming they on top and I'm a mile up. I had them all online before I dial up. How they claiming they on top and I'm a mile up.